Hi, my name is Mikaela Meyer, and I'm currently a PhD student at Carnegie Mellon University. Today, I'll be giving you a preview of our paper where we created a risk assessment instrument to predict the risk that an individual receives an especially lengthy sentence in the US federal legal system. Today, in the criminal justice system, risk assessment instruments are being used to predict the risk that the defendant poses to society. For example, in the pretrial context, where the outcomes of interest are often whether the individual commits new criminal activity or whether they willfully flee and fail to appear to future court dates, we see that these outcomes can be framed as the risk that the defendant is posing to society. Similarly, in the parole and probation contexts, where risk assessment instruments are used to predict whether the individual is at risk of either committing new criminal activity or violating the terms of their parole or probation status, these outcomes can also be framed as the risk that the individual is posing to society. However, we also see that the criminal legal system itself poses risks to the defendant. For example, these risks include the risk of being detained pretrial, the risk of being wrongfully convicted, or the risk that the defendant receives a sentence that is especially lengthy given the legally relevant circumstances of their case. In particular, for this last point, we find that in the United States federal legal system, according to the academic literature, these disparities are well documented. These disparities in sentencing occur based on an individual's race, an individual's gender, the district or circuit in which the case is being tried, which is effectively the geographic region of the United States where the case is being tried, as well as the party of the president that appointed the judge that is overseeing the case. These disparities are problematic, and so we would hope to be able to reduce them over time. We developed our risk assessment instrument with the hope that a tool like this could be eventually used to reduce sentencing disparities within the US federal legal system. The approach that we took to develop our risk assessment instrument was to use this two-stage modeling approach. In the first model, we wanted to find what an especially lengthy sentence is. So we use our first stage model to predict an individual sentence length based on legally relevant factors and compare this predicted sentence length to their actual sentence length. Once we've defined what an especially lengthy sentence is and figured out which sentences are considered especially lengthy, we can then use these flags as outcomes for our risk assessment instrument, our second model. For both of these models, we're able to then evaluate the models themselves as well as their predictions. We go further in depth in the results, not only in our paper, but also in the longer presentation. But just to give you a preview of what we found that our risk assessment instrument performs comparably well to risk assessment instruments that are currently being used in the criminal justice system today. On the x-axis of this figure, we have a variety of risk assessment instruments that are currently being used in the criminal justice system. And on the y-axis, we're showing you their AUCs. And what we find is that our risk assessment instrument performs well enough to be considered good by the standards of the criminal legal system risk assessment instruments. And we also find that our risk assessment instrument performs pretty well compared also to other risk assessment instruments that are being used in the criminal legal system. Along the way, we've encoded values and encountered some technical limitations, though as we describe in our paper and as well in the longer presentation, this isn't unique to our risk assessment. And we would hope that objections to our tool would be equally applied to the question of the suitability of currently used criminal justice risk assessment instruments. Thank you, and we look forward to answering any questions you might have.